Everybody, thanks for watching. So yeah, get right into this video. So I want to thank a lot of the people who I've been talking to over the last few weeks. A lot of Christians, a lot of people have been asking questions. A lot of people who watch my videos want more insight into what's going on, and a lot of people don't want to just accept what they've been told. And it's a lot of information out there. It's a lot that's been going on over the last few weeks. So one of the things that I've talked about before was the biblical manuscripts. I have plenty of videos when I get into this, because this is what we're looking to as the authority, as the information on Christianity and the Bible itself. This is what we're looking to, saying, because of these manuscripts, this must be true. Because these manuscripts exist, this must be true about the Bible and these stories. Because we have authorities, right? We have the church, the papacy, who is telling us, based upon these manuscripts, that these things are true. So you have to understand, and I don't think a lot of Christians understand this, that we are getting what we know as the Bible, as religion, biblical religion, the Abrahamic religions, from manuscripts, biblical manuscripts, besides, the Quran. So if we're going to accept this, then you need to understand everything about these manuscripts. What is it about them? Are we really accepting these, manuscripts as the end all be all in our religion? Or is it just the stories themselves, that we get caught up in the stories, and that's what people are accepting? And this is what I'm saying. People get caught up in the stories and the way they're being taught by the church as to how they believe in the Bible, and then everything that's around the stories. It's a lot to it. So this is going to be probably one of the most damaging videos to Christianity that's available, period. So this is going to be one of the most, if you watch my videos, I explain things. So I'm going to break this down to you. It's a lot to get into. I'm going to break this down to you in the best, easiest way possible, without using too many big words or terms or what have you, so that, anybody can really understand who is doing this research. And it's going to be, again, one of the most damaging videos to Christianity. And here's the thing, a lot of people think I'm just some hater. I just hate Christians and I hate Christianity. I'm an evil person. If you know my story, I grew up in church. My uncle was a preacher. I sung in a church choir. I was cool with everybody. This is what I love to do. I was a diehard Christian. If you knew me, I went to church all the time, twice a week. I literally joined the military because I believed I was fighting God's fight, right? This is what I was supposed to be a soldier in God's army, right? So when I set out to understand the Bible, I set out to prove it correct, because I did not like non-believers. I couldn't stand them. So I know how a lot of Christians feel about non-believers, but this is based upon my understanding of the Bible, me growing up in church, me having a uncle that's a preacher, me being close to the pastor, me being in the church choir, and everything that's surrounding the church. These are good people. They can't be wrong. We have a pope. We have churches everywhere. Who created it? It's how we get here. Bible has to be correct, right? So I grew up and I understand how people feel. So when I set out to, embark upon this work, I set out to prove it was true. And in doing so, traveling to these countries, I've been to Egypt, I've been to Israel, I've been everywhere. You name it, it was in the Bible, I've probably been there. And I set out to prove this stuff. And it wasn't to just, explain and express to people that this stuff is real. It was just for my own sake. I wanted to know. And again, as I always say, if you go out and you do the actual research, if you go to these countries, there's no way you're coming away still believing in the Bible, right? So the question right now, the thing that's in question right now, what a lot of people are latching on and holding on to, is the biblical manuscripts. And I want people to know this. First of all, there's some people who think I teach the same stuff as Billy Carson. I do not. So if you've seen any of my videos that has an Anunnaki logo or what have you, you didn't watch the video. So all those videos, if you see anything about me talk about Anunnaki, is me debunking that bullshit that Billy Carson talks about as far as Anunnaki and all this other craziness, right? So I will tell you if something is spooky. I will tell you if something is far-fetched, that I agree is far-fetched, but it just goes with the research. I in no way, shape, or form believe in what Billy Carson is teaching or has taught as far as Anunnaki stuff. Now, me and Billy do agree on some things as far as the craziness of the God in the Bible and some other crazy stuff with the Bible pertaining to slavery and what have you. So I agree with him on some of those aspects, but clearly not on everything. If you watch my videos, you understand what I talk about. I'm not no militant dude that's here, kill whitey and kill all white people and all this and that and everything that the crazy Hebrews talk about. I'm not with none of that. I'm simply about the truth. What is the fucking truth? That's all I care about. Because if the truth led me to Christianity or Islam or whatever, that's what I'd be following, right? So it's a thing called research and you have to do it. But it's a lot to get into. So let's get into these manuscripts so you can understand that we are really basing everything we know as Christianity on these things. And the biggest one of all, the biggest one, can't forget this one, faith. So now, here it is. Either Jesus existed and nobody wrote or talked about him, during the time he was alive up until years later after he died. Nobody said anything. Nobody wrote anything, right? So either that's the case, right? People just forgot about him, wanted to not relive the whole thing. Either that's the case or the whole thing is bullshit. It's made up. And it's made up to control the people, right? It's going to make sense, right? So you have to understand, right? What happens? Jesus crucified, Jesus dies, age 33, in the year, supposedly 33 AD. Now, after Jesus died, it is believed that a manuscript was written that they call Q, right? Q gospel, Q source. Q is like from the Greek, it's a Greek word, QL, however you want to pronounce it. That means source. So they believe that a manuscript was written maybe 10 to 30 years after Jesus had died. And it was used, it's what Luke and Matthew possibly used to write their gospels. Now, we don't have a fragment of Q. It is a hypothetical manuscript that they think existed. There's absolutely no proof of Q. I call it a buffer. They're trying to attach as much as they can to the death time of Jesus up into, we start getting these manuscripts because it's a huge gap and it doesn't fit or make sense, right? So you have to make all this work somehow, and they just cannot. So Q would be like the first manuscript on their manuscript timeline. And they believe that Matthew and Luke used it basically when they was writing their gospels. Then we have the letters of Paul, right? So you guys know the story of Paul. You read Acts and, the story of Paul is in there. Paul, who was a Pharisee, who basically was going around and persecuting Christians, locking them up, just causing hell, having them killed, all kinds of craziness that Paul was doing. And remember, he was on the road to Damascus and he basically saw Jesus or heard Jesus or what have you. And that light that he saw blinded him for 3 days, right? 3 days he was blind. God sent somebody in there to heal him. And basically, he had to sit there and wait for instructions. So he basically got the instructions that he's supposed to go out and, just spread the word of Jesus and prophecy or what have you. And this is what he did. You guys know the story. He went out, he built churches, he spread the word, and he was arrested. And while he was in prison, he wrote letters. And this is what we have, the letters of Paul. And that's another big deal when it comes to the biblical manuscripts and the creation, leading up to the creation of the Bible, right? We have the letters of Paul that Paul wrote about 4 letters while he was in prison. And he is believed to have written 13 books of the New Testament, which no scholar agrees on this. They believe he wrote maybe around 6 that they can probably agree upon. They believe some of his followers wrote some of the books of the New Testament. But Paul is given a lot of credit for writing the majority of the New Testament, right? So we have that. Now, here's the thing. Same thing with Paul. We don't have the original letters of Paul. We have fragments, but those fragments are dated from the 2nd century CE. We don't have none during the time that he wrote them. The 2nd century CE is the oldest fragment that we have of Paul. So real quick, the lab, Jesus dies, 33 AD. We supposedly get Q, which we don't have any proof that Q ever existed, not even a fragment. You're supposed to get that around, 40 to 50, let's just say CE. And then right around the same time, we supposedly get the letters of Paul that we don't have the originals of either. We have fragments. We have P46. As you can see here, that's dated between Well, around the 2nd century CE, a little bit later, some believe, let's just say between 175 and 225 AD, right? This is the date that they put it around. So Paul is killed in Rome around 64, 67 AD. You don't really know exactly what date. In Rome, and we don't know how he died. Supposedly he was beheaded, but who knows? So we're talking about, 100, 200 years after the death of Paul that we have, a fragment, P46, of Paul's letters. And of course, again, they're going to say, well, wait a minute. No, it was written around, the life of Paul, but we don't have those. And this is what you have to understand. We do not have them. We don't have this stuff. So we got to go by the date that we have it. And then you have to understand everything that happens after that. We have copies of copies, and we'll get into that. So understand, this is the establishment, the beginning, because everything is going to be based off of what happened when Jesus died. And it's going to make sense of how this whole thing is lined up and who is responsible for what. So now also, right around the time that Paul supposedly writing these letters and everything's happening with Paul, we have the synoptic Gospels that they believe are being written around the same time, around 50 to 67, let's say, CE. Now, the synoptic Gospels, we know Matthew, Mark, Luke. Synoptic just basically mean they're basically, similar. They follow a same pattern or what have you. John is different, right? So we have the synoptic Gospels supposedly being written. It's the same story. We don't have the originals, right? We have P52, which is Raylan's papyrus, which you guys heard about, that we basically got around, the 1920s. And it's not like it was in a vault somewhere. It was sold in Egypt to was Bernard Grimfeld, I believe his name was, and it was translated in 1935, right? So it is dated back, and of course they don't agree on this date either. So it's dated between 125 and 175 CE, right? So those are the synoptic Gospels, which we don't have the originals. We only have copies and fragments or what have you. Just like with Paul's letters, right? So now, again, timeline. Jesus' death. We have the Q, which basically don't exist. We have Paul's letters, and then we have the synoptic Gospels being written around the same time they believe. But we don't have no originals. We only have copies of copies, and they are dated to the 2nd century CE. So now here's where it starts getting a little bit weird. So now, we don't have the names of the Gospels. We don't get the names of the Gospels, which some of you guys know this already. We don't get the names of the Gospels until the 2nd century CE. Now, of course, this is debated, but understand, there is no Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John until the 2nd century CE. Who knew that? Who didn't know that? A lot of people didn't know that. But there is no Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John until the 2nd century CE because there was no names on those Gospels. Now, this is debated, but it's basically only debated by people who want to believe Irenaeus or not, right? So Irenaeus is the one who came forward and basically said, hey, Papias mentions this, and Papias was a follower of John. And John basically talked to Papias, and Papias wrote stuff down. So we can basically go through Papias to get confirmation or an eyewitness account of an apostle basically giving us scripture or giving us a manuscript or what have you, or let's just say sayings of Jesus or what have you. And the Christian apologists and the people who basically fight for the Bible and who want you to believe all this stuff, they swear by Irenaeus. Like, this is the one thing they got to go to. Irenaeus says, and it's what basically was accepted. So now, Papias was one of the apostolic fathers, which the apostolic fathers are like people who are influenced by the apostles or close to the apostles. Now, the apostles, of course, are the people who are basically considered to have the authority to speak on the behalf of Jesus, right? So everybody believed the apostles, and the apostles' word was basically the same as Jesus because they were basically granted the understanding that they are speaking on behalf of Jesus and continuing the word of Jesus or what have you after he's gone. So apostolic fathers, we already know, Barnabas, he's talked about that a lot, Billy Carson, Ignatius, Clement, and Polycarp, right? Polycarp. So Polycarp, and we're talking about Irenaeus here, Polycarp, well, Irenaeus was basically a student of Polycarp. Now, Irenaeus is saying that Papias was close to John, right? Now, if that's true, that would make Papias an eyewitness, as I said, an eyewitness to what John was saying, and that John was basically speaking to Papias and telling him, what's going on with the apostles and everything like that. Now, Papias was a companion of Polycarp. So now I know it gets a little bit confusing, but we'll break it down real quick again. So understand, you have Irenaeus saying that Papias was close to John. And because of that, we should listen to Papias basically naming the Gospels, saying that these people actually existed and wrote these things, right? And this is only according to Irenaeus, right? And Irenaeus is saying this because his teacher was Polycarp, who Papias was a companion of, and Polycarp was close to John, right? So real quick. Now, here's the problem with that. You have Eusebius. Now, Eusebius read Papias' book, right? And he's saying that, wait a minute, I read Papias' work, and nowhere in there is he claiming to be close to John. He, in his own words, said that he got his information from the elders, right? So it's like a line. When you start to understand, you have the apostles, right? Then you have the elders, and then you have the companions of the elders. So this is who he's saying he's spoken to, one of the companions, right? One of the companions to the elders close to the apostles or what have you. So through that line, it's not eyewitness account. It's not firsthand information. He heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody. And then for us now, in this time, you got to understand, we are supposedly reading the word of a scribe who copied the manuscript, going way back. Supposedly that Papias said that he heard from a companion of an elder who heard from one of the apostles who heard from Jesus himself, right? Understand how this supposedly go. Long time later on. This is what you have to believe and accept if you accept in these manuscripts. But it's important because without Irenaeus saying this, then there's absolutely, which they all agree on now, there's no way we get any of the names of the Gospels before the 2nd century. We don't. So a lot of people don't trust what Irenaeus is saying because of what I just said. It doesn't fit. It don't make sense. It's not enough proof of that. It's his word, which you have Eusebius saying that it's bullshit because he's saying nowhere did Papias say that he was close to John, but Papias is saying in his own writings that I basically got my information from those sources, not John himself, right? Nonetheless, they accept what is said, and they accept that this is enough information to basically say we can name these Gospels what we named them, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, we don't know if these people actually existed, but you need to understand that they are not named. You can Google this. You can look for yourself. I'll make this very easy in this video. Show you Google so you don't have to do it, but you can do it on your own. There's no naming. They are anonymous until the 2nd century CE. To me, that's big, and that should be something that you highly think about if you're a Christian. So now, based upon this, we can understand that the Gospels are not eyewitness accounts. So I know a lot of people don't want to accept that, but based on what I just said and what you can go and research for yourself, they are not eyewitness accounts. They're only said to be eyewitness accounts, but they can't be, right? So a lot of people want to say that scholars are in agreement that they're eyewitness accounts. No, they're not. Scholars are not in agreement on nothing pertaining to the Bible. And you have to look at the scholars and the people, the scientists, the researchers who do put out this information that is supporting biblical information. And you'll see, as I say all the time, these people are attached to the church. These people are funded by the church. Independent researchers and people who really do this will tell you the truth, that this is what the facts show. And it's up to you to have faith and believe or not. As I keep saying to you guys, at the end of the day, no matter what we compile as researchers, you have to have faith if you want to believe in the Bible, because the facts and the truth do not support what's being told and what's been taught to us over the years. So it's up to you to have faith or to keep digging and keep looking for the truth. And that's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do. But none of this stuff has been proven. So we got to go and look. And look at the word gospel. Gospel itself doesn't mean like, facts, proof. Gospel literally translates to good news in Greek. Euangelion, I think it is, right? Euangelion in Greek. So it means good news. Now, what is news? News is something that somebody reports, right? A reporter reports news. Supposedly, you report, past or current events, stuff that you can look at and just talk about. And usually, if you're a good reporter, you have a source, right? And there's nothing better than an eyewitness account, a person that was literally there, that their testimony or their, information or input could go towards your story or your news to basically make the story acceptable, more believable. So if you have a witness and somebody who was there, that helps out. But the information that they say has to add up to the facts and it has to make sense and fit with everything, especially if, it's a legal situation because we don't in a court of law, stuff has to hold up to scrutiny and cross-examination, which, the stuff does not. So now what was Paul doing? Let's go back to Paul. What was Paul doing? Paul was writing letters, right? Paul's writing letters. He's sending them out to the churches. So remember, Paul's supposed to went out and set up all these churches all over and everything like that. So he's writing these letters and sending them out to the churches and let them know, hey, this needs to be done. Make sure that people understand the importance of Jesus and the sacrifice and everything like that. And remember, he's teaching around that time that, these people have to prepare, like the end is coming. I'll get into that later on. But he's preaching the gospel as if, this is going to happen within these people's lifetime. So these orders are basically going out from Paul to the churches, and the people are basically, taking them in and corresponding. But you have to think about it. So we have the letters of Paul that's going out, right? Paul had people follow him. Like these people had disciples. These people had students, right? Now, all these letters go into these different churches. These churches are speaking it to the people, right? Did they make copies of those letters? Now, you have to think about during this time that the letters of Paul sending the letters out to the churches, the people at the churches copying the letters, the people speaking this information to the people in the churches, all this stuff going on. Scribes, these people travel with scribes writing copies, what have you. And none of this stuff survived. None of it. Same thing with the synoptic gospels, right? You had these people writing this stuff down. They had scribes. The stuff went out. Now, they believe it was a circulation of this gospel at one point. None of it survived. It's all gone. Where is it? And we have fragments, but the fragments that we have is not until the 2nd century CE. So you have to understand, like, where is this big gap? Which, again, you have Paul who died around 64, 67 CE. So that's a long time where, we have a manuscript copy or fragment that is only dated until that time. Why is nothing we have dated before that? We have a copy of a copy that's dated, to the 2nd century CE. None of the other stuff survived, and it's something you have to think about. You also have to think about even around the time Jesus was alive, like people were writing, there were scribes, there was people doing things, right? And they want you to believe that everybody was illiterate, nobody wrote anything. It's just these scribes. If you were a scribe, that means your job was to copy, right? You wrote things down. So this was a job, and people who wrote things, and somebody writing stuff, that means somebody has to know how to read stuff. So it's weird to me that nobody wrote anything during the life of Jesus that survived, right? And you have to think about that. It's just so much that's wrapped up into the surviving of these manuscripts and the fact that we don't have any up until a certain point for whatever reason. You would think by now we would have found something from that time frame, and we have not. So we have all this copying going on, and it's not until the 4th century CE that we finally get the New Testament, right? We get the Bible. All this time has passed. A lot's going on. We finally get the Bible around the 4th century. So we have those fragments from the 2nd century. So a lot of time in between there where they finally decide to put this stuff together. Something had to happen. And it's something you got to look at history-wise to say, where does the dates fit? Where do the events fit around this time? So understand that churches back then was like the government, right? The churches back then was basically keeping everybody together and establishing laws. Because we're talking about a time where There's lawlessness going on. There's people raping and pillaging and all kinds of craziness going on. And what are you going to rally the people around to believe in to get them to accept your authority or law if you're not God, right? Who are you? You have to think back then. Think about now. We do stuff because there's the law. It's a legal system that we're under. But back then, it was not such a thing. Unless you was violating, common law. Don't kill, don't steal nobody's shit. Everybody knew that. Then what was there to keep people in check from doing certain things? Because even if you went and killed somebody or stole for somebody, there was really no law coming to get you or anything like that. So you have to understand, like, Paul's letters was going out, and that's basically was him telling them to basically, input all these things and make sure the people was not doing that. It's basically sort of laws that he's putting out there for the church to basically establish over these people when you really understand. I just wanted to go through that, but I'm going to get into what I believe is going on and what's happening. And I'm going to give you facts and proof and truth mixed with my thoughts, my research of what's going on, which my research is going to be backed up by real information, not just spooky stuff, right? So history, and I always talk about this. You got to look at history, understand what's going on around this time or what's happening. So whether you want to accept it or not, and they tell you straight to your face, history has been whitewashed. History has been changed. We all know this. We know that what we know about the ancient world is not what they told us. Now, whether you want to accept it or not, Rome, Italy, was populated by Black people. We know the Etruscans were Black. This is something you can look up on your own. Now, they don't want to admit that these people were entirely Black, but they will admit that there was some Black people within the Etruscan Empire. And they'll say they were either slaves, but they will also say that they were free people. Nonetheless, we can say that it was Black people in the Etruscan Empire, right? Just give us that part, right? We can say that. You can look at a lot of the statues and figures that exist, which proves this because they're Black. We also know about the Greek Empire being Black. We understand what's going on around this time. Again, history has been whitewashed. You have to understand and look at that. And, what if I told you that there was a plan? I mean, possibly even before Kemet fell, between the Greeks and the Romans to basically conquer what they conquered. There was already an established plan between the Greeks and the Romans to conquer what they already conquered. So we're talking about Europe, we're talking about Northern Africa, right? We're talking about a lot of these lands that a plan was already in place. Because you have these people basically connecting and conquering around the same time. And we have the Greco-Roman era. Now, it depends on who you talk to. The data is all over the place. That's a long time. Nonetheless, I'm going to read this here. It says, the Greco-Roman period 332 BC to 395 AD marks the end of Persian rule over Egypt. The Persians, who came from what is now known Iran, were defeated by the Greek conqueror Alexander the Great, who occupied Egypt and founded a new capital city at Alexandria. When Alexander's empire was divided after his death in 323 BC, his general Ptolemy acquired Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty. Greek was the official language of Egypt under the Ptolemies. Greek influence in art, administration, and military organizations continued for the next 300 years. The traditional gods were still worshipped, but new gods were also introduced. I'll say that again. But new gods were also introduced. The Romans gradually began to intervene in Egyptian affairs, and in 30 BC, they conquered Egypt, which we know before that they conquered the Greek Empire. I believe it was in the 3rd century BC. It became a province of the Roman Empire. Roman influence affected every part of Egyptian life, from household utensils to religion. Roman emperors continued to be depicted as traditional pharaohs on temple reliefs.